In this video, I'll be showing you how to build a full stack application using both Python and JavaScript. The idea here is to demonstrate how we design a larger piece of software that has both a front end and a back end. Now for the back end, we'll use Python and Flask and we'll build out an API. We'll also connect that with the database. And then for the front end, we'll use React and JavaScript. You don't need to be an expert in either of these frameworks or languages, but you should have some experience with both Python and JavaScript to make this a little bit easier to follow along with. The main goal is to teach you how you design this system. Overall, we're not going to make anything super complicated, but you're going to see how we separate the responsibilities and the roles, and you get a better sense of how these larger systems work and how we do interactions between two different software components. This is going to be a really interesting video, and this is really what's going to bring you from that beginner or intermediate level up to the point where you have some more comfortability building your own apps and designing different systems and components. So we'll get into the content, but I do want to share with you that I am running a giveaway right now that will give you a chance to win an RTX 4080 or some DLI credits courtesy of NVIDIA. Now I've partnered with them for this video to promote the GTC. This is the Global Technology Conference. It happens every year. This year is happening from March 17th to 21st in San Jose, California. Now there is actually an in-person event. You can pay for tickets to enter that one, or there is a completely free virtual component where you can register for all kinds of great events, workshops, live sessions, etc., and really learn about what's going on in the state of AI. Just to quickly give you a rundown, we've got sessions on generative AI, we have stuff for creators, we have computer vision related sessions, and then 3 sessions that I'm personally interested in are the following. Large-scale production deployment of RAG pipelines, so talking about retrieval augmented generation and LLMs. This has been a big interest of mine recently. I've posted a bunch of videos on the channel. They've also got a session on the future of extended reality and generative AI, and then one I think a lot of you guys will like, which is exploring AI-assisted developer tools. Really cool sessions. I'll link them down below, and if you're wondering how to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is attend the GTC. The virtual component of it is completely free, and then I'll link a Google form in the description. All you have to do is put in your email, country of residence, etc., so we know where to ship the GPU to if you win, and then just attach a screenshot of you attending the GTC. Anyways, that's it. Thanks to NVIDIA for running this giveaway. Good luck to any of you if you do decide to attend the GTC. Just make sure you fill out this form so you can be entered in the giveaway. And with that said, let's get into the video. Okay, so I'm on the computer now and I want to give you a quick demo of what it is that we're going to be building. Now keep in mind that this is a relatively simple application. However, the type of things that we're going to do here will really show you how you architect out a front end and a back end, how they communicate with each other, and that's really where the real value is. It's not necessarily in the project. Obviously, I could have made this a lot better, but the idea is I want to give you a template, I want to teach you the base, and then allow you to extend this and go build your own applications rather than you guys watching me, say, style a web page for 3 or 4 hours. That's not going to give you the same value than it will be for me to actually show you all of the back-end architecting, how you design this, how you set up the different endpoints, how an API works. That's what you're going to learn in this video, so keep that in mind, even though I know the finished project is a little bit boring. Regardless, this is a contact list. This uses a persistent database. So if I refresh, you can see everything is still here. We have the ability to update, delete, create, and fetch, or to get the different entries. So this is kind of a CRUD, create, read, update, delete application. You can see here that I could go and maybe change the email to say tim2@gmail.com. When I do that, you'll actually see a corresponding request get sent to my backend, which is running in the background. If I want to create a new contact, I can do that. Maybe Sarah, I don't know, let's go Jose. I know that doesn't really make sense, but we'll do it at gmail.com, create new contact. And if we want, we can delete one of the contacts. And as I showed you, we can update. So that's about it. This front end is built in React. It's pretty straightforward. You can style it after if you want, and it allows us to interact with the back end, which is written in Python with Flask. So with all that said, let me open up a new folder here and let's get started building out this application. All right, so I'm inside of Visual Studio Code and we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Now I've opened up a new folder called tutorial, and I wanna mention that if at any point in time you're getting stuck, all of the code that I write in this video will be available from the link in the description. Now at this point, I'm going to assume that you've installed both Python and Node.js, and you have worked with React and Python before. You don't need to be an expert. If you're still beginner with those libraries, it's fine, but you should have seen them before or used them a little bit, because this isn't going to be a completely from scratch beginner tutorial. I'm assuming that you're kind of more at that intermediate level. Feel free to follow along regardless, but just want to mention that so that you don't get super intimidated as I go through. Now what we're going to do here inside this new folder I've opened in VS Code is we're going to make a folder called Backend. Now that we have Backend, that's where our Backend and our Python app is going to live. And in our terminal, we are going to create a new React application. Now, as of 2024, the command to do this has changed. I'm going to paste in the command because it's a little bit long. This is npm create vite, whatever you want to say, at latest, and then you're going to give the app a name. In this case, we're going to call it frontend, and then 2 dashes, and then dash template React. Okay. So go ahead and hit enter with this command, and this should make a new folder for us. You can see that we have the front end folder. Now it gives us some commands to actually run the front end. So we can cd into front end, and then we can type npm install to install the necessary packages. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so while that runs, let's quickly talk about the order we're going to go in here. We're going to start by building the backend. Now, typically when you're building an application like this, you want to build the API or the backend first. And what this acts as is kind of the structure of the application and really the different operations that you can perform. So in our case, we're going to be creating a CRUD backend. Now this stands for create, read, update, delete. So we want to implement these 4 main operations. In our case, it's going to be on one instance or one object, which is kind of a contact, right? We're creating a contact, we're updating a contact, we're deleting a contact, or we are fetching or getting the different contacts. Now, that's really all that we're doing here with the backend. And what that involves is setting up some different routes, so some things that can be called. Now, these routes or these endpoints can be called from really any type of application. It doesn't have to be a React front end. It could be any front end. It could be another back end. The idea is we create this protocol or this application programming interface that now defines the set of operations that our application has. And then we can go implement a nice front end. We can build it in an app. We can do really anything we want to call these different methods. You'll see what I mean as we go through here, but that's kind of the high level overview that you should understand at this point. Okay, so now we're going to change directories and we're going to go into our backend directory. So we go into the root directory and then cd into backend, and we're going to install a few different Python modules that we're going to need for this tutorial. Now, the Python modules we're going to need are the following. We're going to say pip3 install and then Flask. Now, if you're on Windows, it's probably going to be pip rather than pip3. So this is going to install Flask for us. So let's go ahead and hit enter. You can see I've already got that installed. As well as Flask, we're going to need Flask and then dash SQL and then Alchemy. Now, this is something known as an ORM, which is an object relational mapping, which allows us to connect to a SQL database and kind of map the entries in SQL into a Python object so we can operate on our objects quite a bit easier. So we're going to pip install Flask SQL Alchemy. I already have that installed, so I'm not going to install it. And then we're also going to install Flask-cores. Notice the capitalization is different here. And this is going to allow us to have cross-origin requests, which we'll talk about when we get to that point. So again, you want Flask, Flask SQL Alchemy, and then Flask-cores. Okay, so install all of those. And for your pip command, that should be working. If not, you can also try Python -m pip install, and always if you're on Mac or Linux, it's going to be Python 3, whereas on Windows it's going to be Python, which makes my job a little bit harder to explain, but hopefully you guys know the difference in those commands. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to go into backend and we're going to create a few files. We're going to have main.py, we're going to have models.py, and we're going to have config, if we can spell this correctly, .py. Okay, now config is going to contain the main configuration of our application. I like to separate this out in a separate file so it's nice and easy to see and to find. Main is going to contain our main routes or the main endpoints. If we had a really large app, we might separate this into multiple files, but in our case, it's pretty straightforward. And then models is going to contain all of our database models. So pretty much how we interact with the database. And when we use Flask SQL Alchemy, what we do is we create a Python class, which represents kind of an entry or a row in our database, kind of like a table. And we define the different columns and data that this object will be storing. Okay, so that's it for these files. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go into config and we're going to configure our application. Remember, we're building the API first, which happens in Flask. So we're going to say from Flask, import Flask with a capital F. We're going to say from Flask underscore, if we could spell this correctly, and this is going to be SQL Alchemy, import, and then SQL Alchemy. We're then going to say from Flask underscore cores, import in all capitals cores. Now this stands for cross-origin request. And what this allows us to do is send a request to this backend from a different URL. Now, by default, when you send requests, they're going to be kind of protected so that our server can't be hit from a different URL. That might be a little bit confusing for you, but in our case, we have a front end, which is a different server than the back end. We want the front end to be able to communicate with the back end. In order for that to work, we're going to have to remove this kind of cores error, which can pop up. So that's what this cores module is doing. If you've never seen the error before, it's going to be confusing. If you have, you'll know exactly what I mean. Okay, so we're going to say app is equal to Flask, and then we're going to say underscore underscore name underscore underscore. Okay, this initializes the Flask application. Now that we have this, we're going to have a few more things of configuration. So we're going to wrap our app in cores. So we're just going to say cores and then app like this. All that does is it's going to essentially disable that error for us. So now we'll be able to actually send cross-origin requests to our app. Next thing we need to do is initialize some database things. So we're going to say app.config, and then inside of set of square brackets, we're going to say SQL Alchemy in all capitals underscore database underscore URI is equal to, and then this is going to be SQLite and then colon / mydatabase.db. What we're doing here is specifying the location of the local SQLite database that we're going to be storing on our machine. So all we're doing is we're just storing essentially a file, which is going to be a SQLite database. This is really easy to work with in Flask. So we need to specify, okay, well, where do we want to save it, or what is the name of it? So you always start that with SQLite colon / and actually there's going to be 3 slashes, my bad, not 2. And then the name of your database, which is mydatabase.db. You can name this anything that you would like. Okay, next we're going to say app.config, and this is going to be SQL Alchemy, assuming I spelled that correctly, I think I did, underscore track underscore modifications, and for now we're going to make this equal to false. Now all this does is mean we're not going to track all of the modifications we make to the database. You may want to enable that, but for our development purposes, it's just going to make our life a little bit easier, so we're going to disable it. Last thing we're going to do here is we're going to create an instance of the database. So we're going to say db is equal to SQL Alchemy, and then we're going to pass our app. Now what this is going to do is create a database instance, which gives us access to the database that we specified here. So we can create, modify, delete, etc. And you're going to see how easy it is to do that using this database object from Flask SQL Alchemy. Again, what this acts as is an ORM, object relational mapping, meaning we can have a Python class that's just normal Python code. And using normal Python code, we can modify this SQL database because pretty much any command we perform will be kind of translated for us automatically into SQL and then applied to the database, making our life really, really easy. Okay, so that is config.py. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start defining our database models. Now notice the order that I'm going in here, right? I start with my configuration, then I'm going to go to my database. The reason I do this is I want to know the different pieces of data that I'm going to be working with so that when I start writing my code, I already have that out of the way. So I start with my basic configuration. Okay, this happens first. That makes sense. Next, we do our database models, and now we'll know what kind of fields we need, how we're going to be adding them, how we're deleting them, different keys that we might want to check. So always kind of start with the data first, and then once you know the different data you're going to have, you can start creating different views that will allow you to create that data or modify that data, which is really what the API is going to be responsible for doing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say from config import db. Now this is a relative import, and this is happening from this config file. So we're saying, okay, we have this config Python file. It's got this db variable. We're going to import that because this is the instance which is going to give us access to SQL Alchemy. Now we're going to create a class. And this class is going to be called contact. and it's going to inherit from db.model. So what we're saying is this is going to be a database model represented as a Python class, and now in Python code, we can define the different fields that this object will have. So first, we're going to have an ID. You always need to have an ID for all of your database instances. So we're going to say ID is equal to db.column. And inside of here, we're going to specify the type of the field, which is going to be an integer. Next, we are going to say the primary underscore key is equal to true. And what this means is that this is the key we're going to use to index this, and it must be unique for every single entry inside of the database. We're then going to specify the other things that we want to store for a contact. Now for a contact, we're going to have a first name, a last name, and an email. That's it. We could add a lot more later if we want. I just want to keep it nice and simple. So I'm going to say db.column, and then here we're going to say that this is db.string, and whenever you specify a string column, you have to give it a maximum length. So in this case, we'll give it a maximum length of 80. We're then going to say unique is equal to false, and nullable is equal to false. Now what that means is that you cannot pass a null value. So let me just make this a little bit easier to read here. So if you try to make the first name null, you're going to get an error. So you have to pass something for first name. That's all nullable does. Now we're going to copy this twice and paste it down here. For this one, we're going to change it to last name, and it's going to stay exactly the same because we just want the same field, but for the last name. Then we're going to have an email. So we're going to say email is equal to this. And what we'll do is make the email unique so that no two contacts can have the same email. And then what we're going to do is just make this a little bit longer, and we'll say, okay, the maximum length for an email, we'll make it 120 characters. Okay, so that's about it. The next thing we're going to do is define a function here called to_JSON. And this is going to be something that can take all of the different fields that we have on our object here and convert it into a Python dictionary, which we can then convert into JSON, which is something we can pass from our API. So when we build an API, typically the way we communicate is we use something known as JSON. JSON is a JavaScript object notation, and it really just looks like a Python dictionary. So what we'll be doing is we'll be passing JSON back and forth. So the API will return JSON, and then we will send JSON to the API for creating our different objects. So what I want to do is say, okay, I've got all these different fields that I'm storing in my contact, but now I want to make it so that I can convert them all into this JSON object. So it's really easy for me to take a contact and give that to the front end or to anyone who's requesting to get our different contacts. So what we're going to do is say return. We're going to return a Python dictionary, and we're going to say ID is equal to self.id. We're going to say first name like this is equal to self.firstname. We're going to say last name is equal to self.lastname. And then email is equal to self.email. Now, quick pause here. You'll notice that what I did is I pretty much just wrote the same field names except in camel case without any spaces or anything, and then associated it with their value. Now, the reason I'm using camel case here is because when we use JSON, the convention is to have camel case fields. So camel case is just like the word, and then you have a capital letter on the next word. Whereas snake case, which is what we're using here, is the convention for Python. So it gets a little bit confusing, but when we're writing Python code, so a variable like this, we do it in snake case. When we're working with JSON, or when we're going to be kind of returning values from our API, we want to do this in camel case so that it matches the convention of JSON data. It's kind of just a style thing. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but I just wanted to mention why we have that. All right, so that's it for our data. So we have our data and we have our configuration, and now we're going to go into main and we're going to start writing the different routes that we need. Now, before I start writing anything, I like to kind of figure out what are the different endpoints or routes that I want for my API to access different data resources, to create resources, etc. Now, in our case, we want a CRUD app, which is create, read, update, delete. So we need an operation for creating, for reading or getting, for updating, and for deleting. So we can kind of write those out in some comments, right? We can start by saying, okay, well, we want to create. And then we have to specify, well, when we create, what do we need? Well, in order to create a contact, we need our first name, right? We need our last name, and we need our email. So what that tells me is that when I submit a request, and I'll talk about this request and response structure in just a second, to the create endpoint, I need to pass these different values. Now let's quickly talk about this because I want to make sure I'm not confusing a lot of you with endpoints. So when we create an API, what we typically have is a server that's running the API. Now the server has some kind of address. In our case, the address is going to be something like localhost :5000 because we're running this on our local machine. Now this is the domain or the server's URL. If we're talking about other like websites you've gone to, something like google.com, right? That is the domain or the URL. Now an endpoint is simply anything that comes after this domain. So if I have localhost :5000/home, the endpoint is home, right? So we're going to the home endpoint. So in our case, we're going to have a create endpoint, right? We'll probably call it something like create contact. Now what I'm saying is when we hit this endpoint or when we submit a request to the endpoint, we're going to have to submit some data alongside just the endpoint. So we're saying, okay, yes, we're going to go to this endpoint, but we want to create the contact. What do we need for that? We need the first name, last name, and we need the email. Now let's quickly talk about request and response. A request is anything that we send to some kind of server, in our case, an API. Now what we're doing is we're requesting something to happen. And our request has a type. Now this type can be one of many different things, but the typical ones are going to be the following. The first type that's very common is a GET request. Now a GET request means that we're trying to access some type of resource. So it just means we want to get something, we want to retrieve something. Another type of request we have is a POST request. A POST request means we're trying to create something new. So in the case where we are using create contact, when we send a request here, the type of our request is going to be a POST request because we want to create a new contact. Now we also have a put or a patch request. Now this is something that you use when you want to update something. So I want to maybe update a contact, so I'm patching it, I'm changing it. We then have a delete request, and we have a bunch of other requests as well that you can use, but these are the four most common ones. Now, as well as the type, we also have some other data that we can send. And one of this piece of data can be JSON data. Now, JSON data is exactly what I kind of wrote out before, and it's information that comes alongside our request that's going to be used while we're handling the request to do something. So in this case, we want to delete a contact. Well, we need to pass the type of contact we want to delete or what contact it is, right? In the case where we want to create a contact, we need to pass the data to create the contact. So that is the really basics on a request. We send a request. In our case, the front end is going to send a request to our backend, and then the backend is going to return a response. Now, a response will contain a few things. It's going to contain a status, and the status specifies if the request was successful. So a status of 200 means success, and you may have seen a status like 404 before, and that means not found, right? So when you see those 404 pages, that means, hey, you went to a URL, you tried to receive some HTML to be rendered on your screen, but it wasn't found, so what did you get? You got a status of 404, request not found, right? We were not able to do this because what you requested didn't exist. We also have things like 400, which is bad request. We have stuff like 403, I believe, which is forbidden or unauthorized. There's all different types of response statuses or codes that we can use to indicate what happened. We also can return some JSON. So in the case where we maybe want to get a contact, then when we have a response, we're going to be responding with a JSON, which is equal to whatever that contact is. Hopefully this is making a little bit of sense, but the idea is we have these different endpoints, right? They're just code written in Python. They can handle a request, which will come from some external source, in our case, the front end or a website. And then our API is going to return a response, which contains how that request was handled. It's going to say, yes, this was successful. Here's the result you're looking for, or no, there was some kind of error. So that's what we're building here. We're building this API and this structure. So let's get started doing that. And I promise it'll start to make a bit more sense. So I'm going to say from Flask import request and JSONify. Now what JSONify will do is allow us to return JSON data, which you've kind of already seen. We're then going to say from config import the app and import our database. And we're going to say from models import the contact model. So from config, we're importing the app and we're importing our database. From models, we're importing contact. And then from Flask, we just need this request object and we need JSONify. Okay, now first thing we need to do is we need to run our Flask application. So we're going to say if the name is equal to underscore underscore main underscore underscore. Keep in mind these are two underscores here. Then what we're going to do is say app.run and then debug equals true. Now what this checks is if we're running this file directly. So it means, hey, if you actually ran main.py, then execute the code that's inside of here, this essentially avoids us running this code if we were to maybe import something from this file instead. Because in Python, when you import something from a file, it's going to execute all of the code in that file. But when we have this line, it kind of protects us from that, which means, hey, if we import this file, don't do this. But if we run the file directly, do this. Now, another thing that we need to add here is we need to instantiate our database. Now, I know I butchered that word, but you get the idea. So we're going to say with app.app underscore context db.createAll. Now what this does is say, okay, right when we start the application, or we're about to start the application, we're going to get the context of our application. Don't worry too much about this code. I'm not going to explain in depth how it works. Then we have db.createAll. Now what this says is go ahead and create all of the different models that we have defined in our database. Now it only does this if they're not already created, but the idea is we need to actually spin up the database if it doesn't already exist. So that's what this code is doing here. It's saying, okay, do we already have the database? Well, if we don't, we got to create it. So let's go ahead and do that. Then we start running the code, and that will run all of our different endpoints and our API. Okay, so let's begin by just writing the get method, okay? So the first thing we'll want to do, right, is like get some context. So how do we get these different contexts? And I want to show you how that works. So we're going to start by saying @app.root, and then inside a set of parentheses here, we specify the root or the endpoint that we're going to go to. So I'm going to say /contacts. Then beside this, we're going to say methods equal to a list, and we're going to specify the valid method types. Okay, before I go any further, let me explain this. This here is something known as a decorator. Now this goes above a function, which we're going to write in a second. You don't need to know exactly how it works, but you just know the name decorator. Inside of here, right, because we're saying, okay, we're creating a new root, we specify what root we're going to go to. In this case, it's /contacts. And then we specify the valid methods. And remember, I was telling you we have methods like post, delete, patch, etc. But those are only valid for certain URLs. In our case, we only want to be able to use the get method for this URL. So that's what we're doing. Now beneath here, we're going to write a function. So we're going to say def and then get underscore context. You can call this function anything you want, so long as it's unique. And then inside of here, we can actually specify how we want to handle a get request that is sent to this root. So what I'm going to do is say contacts is equal to contact.query and then .all. Now what this does is it uses Flask SQL Alchemy, which is our ORM, to get all of the different contexts that exist inside of the contact database. That's all it's doing. It's just getting all of the different contexts, and I told you it's super easy to do that. So it gives us a list of all of the different contexts. The issue is these contacts are Python objects, right? Like they look like this. They're a Python object that have the fields ID, first name, last name, email. Now we can't return Python objects from our code. What we can return instead is JSON data. So what we need to do is take all these Python objects and we need to convert them into JSON. Now that's why we wrote this toJSON method here that we're going to use from main.py. So I'm going to do a little bit of fancy Pythoning here, but what we're going to do is say JSON underscore contacts are equal to, and I'm going to use this map function. Now in the map function, I'm going to pass a function, which is lambda. I'm going to talk about this in a second. I'm going to say lambda x and then x dot to underscore JSON. And then I'm going to pass my contacts. Okay, what is this doing? Well, our contacts is a list of contact objects. We know that all of these contact objects have the toJSON method. So what we need to do is call that method, for all of the different contacts, and then create a new list that just contains the JSON for the contact. So what map does is it takes all the elements from this list and applies a function to them and gives us the result in a new list. Now the function we're using here is just known as a lambda function. It's just a shortcut for writing a function in one line. You say lambda, you specify a variable, in this case it's the parameter, and then you can use that parameter and call anything you want. So in this case, x is always going to be one of the contacts from our list. We're going to call toJSON on that contact, and then it's going to put it inside of a new list. The only thing is this map actually returns a new map object. What we want instead is a list. So we're just going to convert this to a list nice and easily like that. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to say return, and we're going to say JSONify, and we're simply going to return a JSON object that says context, and that is equal to JSON context. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, we have this context key in our Python dictionary. It's going to be associated with the JSON context, which is what we just created here, which is a list of all of the contexts. We have this Python dictionary object. We convert it into JSON data using this JSONify function, and that's it. That's all we have to do. So now, if we run our code, I'll show you how this works. So I'm going to clear. I'm going to type Python 3 main.py. Now, if you're on Windows, it's just going to be Python. Notice that it's going to start running our server. So let's bring this up here. It says this is a development server, blah, blah, blah. And then it gives us the URL. So we can copy the URL here, which is just localhost port 5000. And if we open up a new browser window, so let's open up one here. Let me just make this a new tab so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, you can see that I pasted the URL in here. And now I'm going to go to /context because context is the get URL. And I'm going to hit enter, and notice that we get this response that says context, and it's an empty list. So what we did when we use the browser here by default is we send a GET request to any URL that we put here. So we put the URL of our server, we put the endpoint, which is /contacts, and then it gave us this JSON reply, which is contacts. Well, we don't have any of those yet. Okay, there you go. That is how it works for actually getting the context. So now we can shut the server down if we want by hitting Control-C. We don't have to, it will actually auto refresh, but I'll just shut it down for now, and we'll start writing the other routes for actually creating, updating, etc. the contacts. All right, so we're back here, and now we'll write the route for creating the contacts. Now to do that, we're going to say @app.routes. We're going to say that this is going to be /create_contact, and this time the methods that will be allowed will be post, because we're going to be creating, which is the post method, right? So now inside of here, we need to write a function. So we're going to say define create_contact. And what we need to do is we now need to get the data associated with the contact we want to create. Now, remember I said that with request, we can submit JSON data. So what we're going to do is look at that JSON data that was submitted here, and we're going to make sure that it's valid for creating our contact. And let me zoom out a little bit just so it's a bit easier to read some more code. Notice that we have this request object imported from Flask. So we're going to start using that. We're going to say first_name is equal to request.json.get, and we're going to get the first name property. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for the last name. Okay, so it's equal to request.json.get, and then last name. And then we're going to do the same thing for email, which is request.json.get, and then email. Okay, so all we're saying is, okay, let's look in the JSON data. We're going to use .get because we don't know if this key is going to exist or not. And if it doesn't exist, it's going to return none. Otherwise, it's going to give us the value of the first name, last name, and email key. Now, we want to make sure that all these values exist, because if they don't exist, then we can't make a contact. So we're going to say if not first name or not last name or not email, okay, then we're going to return essentially an error message saying, hey, this didn't work. So we're going to say return JSONify, and we're going to put inside of here a string that says message, and that says you must include a first name, last name, and email. And then we are going to specify the response error code, which is 400, standing for bad request. At least I believe that's what the correct message is. So again, we're saying, okay, if you did not give us first name, you did not give us last name, or you did not give us an email, we're going to return an error response here. The way we do that is we return a JSON message. So we say, hey, here's the message so that you can read it. And then we actually do a comma, and we return 400, and that says what the status message of the request is. Now, by default, it's going to be 200. So here, I could have just put 200, and that means success, okay? We don't need to put that, though, because that's the default if you don't include it. Whereas in this case, we want to tell them, hey, this didn't work, so we're manually specifying 400. Okay, so now if that was not the case, what that means is that we did have valid first name, last name, and email. If that is the case, we need to make a new contact, add that in the database, and then tell them, hey, this worked, right? This was good. So we're going to say new underscore contact is equal to a contact. And we're going to specify our values. So we're going to say first name is equal to first name, last name is equal to last name, and email is equal to email. So notice that for all the fields here, right, other than the ID, because this will be auto-generated for us, first name, last name, and email, I'm just passing those into the constructor of my contact. So now I create this new contact object that has these different fields. And what I can now do is I can add it to my database. Now to do that, I'm going to do a try and accept block. So I'm going to say try db.session.add new contact. And then I'm going to say db.session.commit. And then I'm going to say accept exception as E. And then what we're going to do is say return JSONify. Don't worry, I'll slow down here in a second. We're going to say message is the string of E. And then we're going to return the status code of 400. Okay, so let's quickly break this down. When we want to add a new entry to the database, we just create the Python class corresponding to that entry. We then add it to the database session. Once it's added, it's kind of in the staging area. So it's not yet actually been fully written to the database. It's just ready to write to the database. Then we commit. When we commit, that means, okay, anything in the session, go ahead and actually write that into the database permanently, which is what commit does. Now the thing is, errors can occur when we do this, so we put it inside of a try except block. And in the except block, we just catch any exception. And if there is an exception, we simply return that as a JSON message to the user, telling them, hey, sorry, something went wrong, status code 400. Great. Now, if we get past the try except block, what we can do is say return JSONify, and we could say a message, and we could just do something like user created, and then we can return a status code of 201, which stands for created, okay? It can be 200 as well, but 201 is a little bit more specific. So what we're doing is saying, okay, well, we handled all the errors. If no errors occurred, we're going to tell you that, yes, this did indeed work. We're going to return 201, and now you've created a new contact. So there you go. That's how that works. Now, the thing is, for us to actually be able to test this, it's a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to test it right now. What I'm going to do is just write the other routes, and then once we have these routes, you just kind of have to trust me that they work, and we will test them from the front end, but I don't want to get into using Postman and doing all this other stuff that's going to just take us a lot of time and not really necessary for such simple routes. However, usually what you would want to do is test your API before you even start working on the front end. So you're going to want to ensure, hey, everything that I wrote here in the back end is working. I'm able to create my data, delete it, update it, etc. Now that I have all my data related stuff done, we're going to go to the front end, we're going to make it nice and pretty, and we're going to interact with the backend API. Now, in order to do that, there are tools, and one of the tools you can use is called Postman. Postman allows you to send these more specific requests like post requests with JSON data to an API, especially in a development environment, to test it out. In our case, we don't want to get into that because it's going to be a bit more complicated. So we're just going to write the next route. Okay, so this is create contact. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, so after creating, we want the ability to update. However, when we update, we need to know what contact it is that we are updating, and then we need to have some data that we're going to perform the update with. So maybe we're updating the name, the email, we don't know. So keep that in mind as I write what's going to happen next. I'm going to say app.root. And this is going to be /update_contact. And then what I'm going to do is specify a path parameter here, which indicates the exact contact we want to update. So I'm going to say int : user_ID. Now what this is doing is saying, okay, we need to pass to this route update contact and then a number indicating the ID of the user that it is we want to be updating. So what that's going to look like, if we call this, is /update contact /1 or /9 or whatever the ID of the user is we want to update. And then beneath that, we will actually grab any of the update information and then update the contact. So to do this, we're going to say define update contact. We're going to take in user ID, and notice that the variable name here matches whatever the path parameter is that I specified here. Okay, now I'm going to say contact is equal to contact.query.get with user ID. Now what this is doing is saying, okay, I want to look in my contact database and I want to find the user that has this ID, because in order for us to update a user, it needs to exist. So the first thing we're doing is looking for the user, and now we're going to check if the user doesn't exist. So we're going to say if not contact, so if no user with that ID exists, return JSONify, and then we're going to say message, and then this is going to be user not found, like that. And also this reminds me that for the root, we're going to need to specify the valid methods. So we're going to say methods is equal to a list. And for this one, we'll actually put patch as the method. We can change it later if we want. It could be post as well, but patch is fine. Okay, and for the status code, we're going to go 404 actually, because we're saying, hey, we did not find the contact. Now, if that's not the case, and we did find the contact, we're going to start parsing through the JSON data. So we're going to say data is equal to request.json, and now we're going to get the first name, last name, email, etc. So what we're going to do is say contact dot first underscore name is equal to data dot get first name, like that, and then comma contact dot first name. Now what this is doing is the following. We're saying, okay, we're going to modify this contact's first name to be equal to whatever the JSON data first name is that was given to us. So if you gave us a new first name, essentially, we're going to use that to update the first name. Otherwise, we're just going to leave it at whatever it was. Now, the way the .get works is it looks for a key inside of a dictionary, which is what this will be. If the key exists, it returns to us that value. If it doesn't exist, it instead returns whatever the second parameter is inside, or the second argument is, sorry, inside of the get function. So in this case, if first name exists, gives us first name. If it doesn't, we just keep whatever the first name was for the contact. Now we're going to do the same thing for the last name. We're going to say this equal to data.get last name, and then contact.last name. And then you guessed it, we're going to do the same thing for the email. So contact.email is equal to data.get email, and then contact.email. So this way, whatever it is that they pass here is what we're going to update. So if they give us a new first name, we update just the first name. If they give us first name and a last name, we update those. It handles any possible combination of the different data they could be passing us, because they may only update one field. They may not update all of them, right? Which is what we're kind of checking. Now what we've done is we've modified the contact. So what we can simply do is db.session.commit. And since this contact already existed, it's already added in the session. So when we commit the session, it makes that change permanently. We then can say return JSONify, like this, and we can pass again a message, and the message can say user updated, like that. And then we can just return 201 for success. I believe there's another exact status code we could use, but I think 200 is totally fine. Okay, so that's it for updating, creating, and getting. Last thing we need to do is handling deleting. So let's do that. And then the API will be finished, and we can go over to the front end, which is where we'll actually see the interactability here in our application. Okay, so let's write another root. We're going to say at app.root, and this is going to be /delete contact, and same thing, we're going to specify a path parameter here for the ID of the contact we want to delete. Now this will just be user ID. Now for the methods, we'll say methods are equal to a list, and this time it's going to be the delete method. Okay, now we're going to define our function. We're going to say delete contact, and then this is going to be user underscore ID. And similarly to before, we're just going to copy this exact code, which is going to give us this contact. So we're going to paste that in. We're going to say, okay, let's look for the contact with the user ID. If it doesn't exist, we're going to return 404. Otherwise, we'll simply delete it, and deleting it is quite easy. We're going to say db.session.delete, and we're going to delete this contact, and then db.session.commit, and then again, return, and this is going to be JSONify of a message, and the message is going to say user deleted. Okay, and then status 200. Okay, that's it. That finishes our API. So if you need to, pause the video, finish coding this out. Of course, you can also reference the code from the link in the description. We can quickly run through it. We have the ability to get, where we query all the contacts. We just convert them into JSON and return them. We have the ability to create. This is a post request. We get all of the JSON data. We make sure that we do actually have a first name, last name, email. Then we create the new contact, add it into the session, and then tell them, hey, this was created. For updating, we need to know the contact we're updating. So we get the contact's ID. We use that to get the specific contact. We then update the data. Did not mean to do that. And then same thing for delete. We get the contact, we delete it, and we return our success message. So what I want to do now is I want to move over to the front end. We're going to start coding this out, and we're going to see how to interact with this backend. All right, so I've just expanded the folder here for front end, and we're going to start just cleaning this up a little bit, and then we'll start writing a few different components that we need. Now, it's not a ton of code, but what we want to do is be able to interact with the backend by pressing buttons, using input fields, etc. So what I like to do right away is go to source and just start deleting a few things that we don't need. So for example, in assets, we can just delete this folder. We don't need that. I want to go to main.jsx. Actually, this looks good. We're going to go to app.jsx, and we're going to remove the import of the Vite logo and the assets here. We're then just going to delete everything inside of here except for this fragment, and we'll get rid of that. Okay, so that's what we want for app. Now for public, we can delete this logo. We don't need that. And we can go to our index.html, and we can remove the reference to the logo. And then for the title, we can change this to contact list. Okay, so that's kind of all we need. What I want to do to begin is just fetch the contacts that we have. Now, by default, we're not going to have any, but I just want to show you how it works in terms of sending that request. And then we'll display all of those and then add the form for creating contacts, updating, deleting, etc. So what we'll actually do is from our backend, notice my backend here, we'll just run this. So Python 3 main.py, just so that that's going, so we can actually test that in a second. And then from app, we're going to set up some state, which is going to store our contacts. So we're going to say constant, and then inside of a set of square brackets, contacts, and set contacts is equal to use state. And this is going to be an empty list because that's what we're going to have for the contacts. Then we're going to make a function. We're going to say const fetch contacts is equal to an arrow function here in React. This is actually going to be an asynchronous function because it's going to need to wait a second to fetch the contacts. And what we're going to do is send a request to the backend to get the contacts. How do we do that? Well, we say const response is equal to await, and then we're going to use fetch. Fetch is something you can use to send a request. By default, it will send a GET request, which is the type that we want to send. And we're going to send to http:// Make sure you have the HTTP, by the way, otherwise it's not going to work. And then 127.0.0.1 port 5000, which is what our Flask server is running on, /contacts. All we're doing is sending a GET request to the /contacts endpoint. Now we're waiting for this to give us a response. Once it gives us a response, we want to get the JSON data associated with the response. So we can say const data is equal to await response.json. That's going to give us the JSON. And then we can say set contacts, and this is going to be data.contacts. Okay, because what's going to happen is it's going to return the JSON. Remember, the JSON that we return looks like contacts and then contains a list. So we grab the contacts property. That gives us this value right here, which is all of our contacts. We then set that in the state. So for now, if we want to see what this is, we can just say console.log data.contacts. And now we just want to call this whenever this component renders. We just want to call it once as soon as we load the website, essentially. So to do that, we're going to import useEffect, and we're going to put a useEffect hookup here. And we're going to say useEffect. Okay, we're going to pass an arrow function. And then inside of this function, we're going to call the fetch contacts function. Okay, so all we're doing is saying, okay, as soon as this component renders, as soon as it loads, call this function. And then here we call this, it's going to give us the contacts and set it in the state. And then we can use that to list all the contacts out. Again, right now we're not really going to see anything because we don't actually have any contacts. It's going to be an empty list, but this will at least allow us to test that we're able to send the request to our backend. And I'll show you how we do that. So here you go. On this side of the screen, we have our, what is this, server, our API. I'm going to split my terminal and I'm going to cd into the front end directory. I'm going to clear, and to run my code, we type npm run dev. Make sure you're in the front end directory for that. It's going to spin up the front end server for us, and you can see that this is running on port 5173, maybe different for you. I'm going to press on Control on my keyboard, or Command if you're on Mac, and press on that, and it's going to open up the browser. Let me just put this in a new window. Now, if we refresh, we should see that every time we refresh, we get a new GET request happening in our backend server over here. So just you can test that, and you can see that it's sending the request. And if we right click here and go on inspect, we should see in the console that we're getting an array with 0 elements, right? So every time I refresh, we get that again. So we get this kind of empty array because, well, that's what's happening, right? We're fetching the contacts and none of them exist, so it's giving us an empty array. Okay, so that's that. And I think that's it for right now in terms of fetching. We can leave these running for now. What we want to do next is we want to actually display all of the different contexts that we have. I'll show you how we can mock some data, by the way, so we can actually view if it's working. And then we want to create a form that allows us to create a new contact. So what I'm going to do is make a new component in this source folder here, and I'm going to call this my contact list.jsx. Now this is where we will write the component for rendering our contacts. So I'm going to say import React from React, and we're going to make a new component. To do that, we're going to say const contact list is equal to a function, and inside of this function we're going to take a prop, and this prop is going to be contacts because we need to have all the contacts that we can render them, so we're going to accept that. And then what we're going to do is start writing out some basic HTML. This is something you've probably seen before. It's going to be very straightforward, that we'll just render our contacts in a table so that we can view all of them. So we're going to return a div. We're going to have a header, so we're going to say header2 contacts, and now we're going to create a table. So we'll make a table in HTML. To start, we're going to define the head of the table, and then beneath that, we can define the body of the table. By the way, if you just want to copy this out, again, you can do it from the link in the description. In the head, we need a table row. In the row, we need our table headers, which are th. First one is going to be first name. The second one is going to be last name. We need another one, so table head. This is going to be email. And then one more is going to be actions, because we're going to have actions like updating and deleting the different entries. So there you go. That's it for the head. Now we want to do the body. Now this is going to be dynamically rendered because it's going to be based on all the context that we actually have. So inside the body, we're going to put a set of braces here, and we're going to say contacts.map, and we're going to map with a function here all of the context that we have, and we're going to return a new row for them. So we're actually going to do a set of parentheses, and we're going to say tr. And then here, we're going to pass a key. Whenever you have dynamic data, you need a key. So for the key, this is just going to be the contact.id. And then inside of the table row, we're going to have table data for all of the different entries we want to show. So we're going to have the contact.firstname. If we could spell that correctly. We're going to do the same thing for the contact.lastname. And then we need the email. So we're going to have contact.email. And then we need the buttons. So we're going to have table data. And then inside of here, we're going to have two buttons. So we're just going to say button. First one, we'll say update. And the second one, we'll say delete. Okay, so that should be it. This, again, dynamically rendering all of the different table rows for our different contexts. Pretty straightforward JavaScript and React here. We have our table data, which contains first name, first name, last name, apologies, email. And then we have our buttons, update and delete. We'll hook those up with some functions in a second. But for now, what we'll do is we'll actually render this component from app.jsx. So we need to export the contact list, I just remembered. So we're going to go down here and say export default contact list. It needs to be exported for us to be able to import it. We're going to go to app.jsx and we're going to import it. So we're going to say import the contact list from ./contact list. And now we're just going to render the contact list. So for return, we can just say contact list, and then contacts can be equal to contacts like that. Now, right now, we're not going to see anything because we don't actually have any contacts. However, if we go to our web page, so let me open this up here. Oh, looks like I closed it. So let's rerun it. Okay, let's open this again. Boom. You see that we get contacts, first name, last name, email, actions. Now it's not very spread out. We can obviously change the styling if we want. But now what we can do if we want to test a contact is we can simply go here. We can comment this out, and we can just set a mock contact, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say first name, Tim, last name, spell that correctly, my last name. Let me just save this. I'm going to say email. Let's go like email and then ID of 1. And I actually realized I don't need to have a string for all of these, but that's fine. So now I'm just setting like a mock contact so we can test this, and let's move this over so we can read it. And now if we go back here, you can see we get first name, last name, email, actions, Tim, Rasika, email, update, and delete. Obviously, it doesn't look very pretty. We can fix the styling later on. And in fact, if we want to just make it look a bit more plain, we can go to app.css and we can just remove all this. So if I grab that and just remove it, if we go back here, we kind of get moved over here. And then if we go to index.css, same thing. If we remove all of that, now we get kind of the original HTML. Now, if we want to just space these out a little bit, we can do that a bit easier. So inside of index.css or app.css, doesn't matter which one you do, we can say .thead, and we can just say the margin is something like 10 pixels. And now if we go back here, actually, we're not getting any spacing there. Maybe we want to do it. It's because I have .th. We just want th like that. Now, if I refresh. Okay, sorry about the cut there, but now that is finished in terms of viewing our contacts. What we're going to do now is we're going to make a component that allows us to create some contacts. So let's remove this mock contact because we don't need this anymore. And we're going to make a new one here, and we're going to call this the contact form.jsx. Okay, so inside of contact form, we're going to, well, create a form. So we're going to say import, and this is going to be use state from React. We're then going to make a function, and we're going to say, actually, we could do it the other way, the way we did it before. We'll say const, and this will be contact form equals an arrow function. Inside of here, we're going to take 2 props, and actually we won't write them yet because I don't want to confuse you. We'll write them afterwards. Anyways, inside this function, we need some state for our form. So we're going to need to store the first name, last name, and email, and then we're going to use that and actually submit that to the API to create a new contact. So we're going to say const first name, and then set first name is equal to use state and empty string. We're then going to say const last name, set last name. For some reason, my shift key is a bit sticky here, not really working that well. We'll say use state, and then const email, set email is equal to use state, and this will be an empty string. Okay, so that's it in terms of the different content we're going to want to store. Next, we're going to return the form. So we're going to say return, and we'll actually return a form. Now inside of the form here, we're going to have a div. Now inside of this div, we're going to have our first kind of label or first input element, which is going to be for our first name. So we're going to say label. This is going to be HTML4 is equal to the first name. Inside the label, we're just going to say first name colon like that. We're then going to have an input tag. And for the input tag, this is going to be type is equal to text. We're going to have the ID equal to the first name. We're going to have the value equal to the first name. And we're going to have on change is equal to, and then this is going to be a function, which is e, and then set first name, and then e dot target dot value. And let's see if we can format that. Okay, for some reason the formatter doesn't seem to want to be working, so it's a bit difficult to read. Let me see if I can get that working. All right, so there we go. I got the formatter working. So now we're actually able to read this. Okay, so anyways, we have our onChange, which is again a function e set first name e.target.value. Now we're going to copy this exact same thing and we're going to paste it twice, one for the last name and one for the email. So we're just going to change these manually to say last name. This is going to be last name, and this will be set the last name. And then we want email, so we'll make this email, and rather than that, just say email, and set email. Okay, so now we have a basic form that's first name, last name, and email. We just want a button now that we can press on that will actually create this element. So we're just gonna say button, and this is gonna say create contact. And then for the type, we'll say type is equal to submit. And now what we want to do is create a function story so that when we actually press on this button, it does something and it creates this contact. Now what I also want to do is export this. I'm going to say export default and then contact form like that. Okay, so what we'll do is make a function now. So we're going to say const on submit is equal to this, and inside of our form we're going to set this up. So we're going to say on submit is equal to on submit. So essentially that means once we press this button, we're going to go into this function. Now in this function we're going to say e.prevent default, and we're going to take in e. That just means we're not going to refresh the page automatically, which we don't want to do. So that's kind of removing that standard behavior. And now we're going to set up a post request so that we can actually create the contact. I also realized this needs to be called set last name. Not sure how I made that set last time. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is start defining the data that we actually want to pass with our JSON as the request. So we're going to say const data is equal to an object, and we're just going to pass in the first name, the last name, and the email, which corresponds with what we're looking for in the API when we create a new contact. We then are going to specify the URL. So we're going to say const URL is equal to http://127.0.0.1:5000/create_contact. Okay, so that's the URL or the route that we want to go to. Now that we have this, we're going to set up some options for our requests. So we're going to say const options is equal to, first thing we're going to do is specify the method. In this case, the method is post. When you are not doing a GET request, you need to actually manually specify all the different options, whereas with a GET request, it just automatically does it for you. So that's what we're writing here. We're then going to pass something known as a header. So we're going to say headers. This is going to be an object again. And we're going to say the content dash type is equal to application/JSON. Now, what we're pretty much specifying here is that we're about to submit JSON data. So we need to include that in a header when we send this request so that the API knows that we actually have JSON data. We're then going to say body is equal to JSON in all capitals .stringify, and we're going to stringify this data. Might seem a bit weird why we're doing this, but essentially this is a JavaScript object. Just like in Python, we need to convert this into a valid JSON object. So what we do is we take JSON.stringify, that converts it into a JSON string, which we then include in the body of our request. Now what we need to do is actually send the request. So we're going to say const response is equal to await, and we're going to say fetch the URL, and we're going to fetch this with the options that we specified. And since we're using async here, we need to put async for our function on the onSubmit. So we're going to do that. So say const response equal to await fetch URL options. We then are going to check if this was successful. So we're going to say if the response.status does not equal to a 1, or the, and actually, sorry, not or, we're going to say and the response.status does not equal 200. So essentially we're just checking, hey, if you did not give us a valid response, so if it wasn't 200 or it wasn't 201, then what we want to do is we want to alert the user that there was an error. So we're going to say const message is equal to await response.json, and then we're going to say alert, and we're going to alert the message dot message, because what happens is inside of the JSON, which actually we could just call data to make this a bit more clear, we have a key called message that contains the error message. So we're just going to alert the user of that. Otherwise, we can say that this was successful, and eventually in a second we will do something here. Now, this actually completes this form. Let me zoom out a little bit so we can read it better. We have the state for all of the 3 variables that we need. We have our on submit. Might seem a bit confusing, but really it's not overly complex. We're just defining the data, defining the URL endpoint, setting the options for the request, sending the request, checking if it was successful. If it wasn't, we're going to alert them with an error. Otherwise, we'll kind of indicate it was successful, but we're not going to do that this second. Okay, so that's about it here for the contact form. Now we need to actually render the contact form. So to do that, we're going to go to app.jsx, and we're just going to make a fragment here, and we're going to take this and place it inside of the fragment, and then beneath it we're going to render the contact form like that. Now let me just actually format this so that it looks a little bit nicer, and there we go. And now we'll remove the comment on fetch contacts, and now we should have a form that will allow us to create a new contact, so we can test that out, and we should have the ability to get that contact once it is created. So let's go back here. You can see that we have our form. Again, a little bit messy, but we can clean that up in a second. For the first name, let's go with Tim. Last name here, we're gonna go tim@gmail.com. Let's click on create. Now notice we don't get any output. The reason we're not seeing anything is because we haven't force refreshed the screen. However, if we refresh here, you'll see that now we actually get this contact appearing. And if we go back to VS Code, and we look here, you can see that we had a post request come in, right? Where it created the new contact and returned the status of 201. Now let's see what happens if we press this and we don't have any values. It says you must include a first name, a last name, and email. If we just do Tim, same thing, we're gonna get that error there, right? And if we try to repeat the same email, we should actually get an error as well. It says here, there's some error that occurred here. Unique constraint failed on contact.email, essentially meaning that the email is not unique, right? And as we said, we need it to be unique. Okay, so that's it for the form. Now we'll make it look a little bit nicer in a second, but you can see that we're getting all those error messages in our API, and well, we are successfully calling the API and creating new contacts. Okay, so now we know how to create new contacts and fetch them. What we want to do now is be able to delete them and to update them. We also just want to prettify the form a little bit. And what I want to do is I want to make it so that if we go back here, we only see this form if we press create or update. So the idea is we can reuse the same form for updating and for creating because it's going to be the exact same information. So what I want to do is make it so that we pop this up in a modal. Modal is just something that's kind of hovering on top of the screen. It's like a little window that pops up. So we're going to implement that modal functionality so that this form is only visible when we're creating or updating. And then we'll reuse it or kind of modify it to be able to update the contact as well. Okay, so setting this up is a little bit complex, but it's okay. We can handle it. So let's go to app.jsx and let's start kind of handling this modal component. So we're going to say const is modal open, and then set is modal open is equal to use state and then false. So what we'll do is we'll set this state to true when we want to actually open the modal. Now we need some functions that will allow us to toggle the modal. So we're going to say const, and this is going to be, I'll actually start with close modal is equal to this. And we'll just say set is modal open to false. We'll then have const open. And the thing is though, this modal can be opened in 2 ways. So it can be opened when we're creating a new contact or when we're editing a contact. So I'm going to say open create modal. Okay. And what this is going to do is it's simply going to say if not is modal open, then we're going to say set is modal open to true. So if it's not already open, then we will go ahead and open it. And now that I think of it, actually, yeah, that's good. That's what we'll do. So if it's not open, then we'll open it up. Okay. Now we need something that will display the modal. So let's go down here and let's write this out. We're going to have a block here and we're going to say is modal open, and If that's the case, we're going to render a div. Now inside of this div, we're going to have a class name. So this is going to be equal to modal. We're going to use a little bit of CSS in a second here. We're then going to have another div. This is going to have a class name equal to modal-content. And then inside here, we're going to have a close button and we're going to have our contact form. So we're going to take the contact form and paste it inside of here. And then above this, we're going to have a span. We're going to have class name is equal to close. And we're going to have on click, this is equal to close the modal. And then inside of here, we're going to put the ampersand times and then a semicolon, which is just the X button. Okay, that's what we're kind of representing here. Okay, so now we have what we need for the modal. We can test this, I believe, actually. However, we don't have a way yet to open it. So let's make a button. And we're going to say button, and this is going to say create new contact. And for the button, we're going to have on click equal to the open create modal. Okay, so we'll see if this works or not for now. We should if we refresh here. When we click create new contact, you see it opens up. And when I click the X button, it closes. However, I want it to kind of appear a little bit nicer than that. So we'll write some CSS so that it's styled, but you can see it is opening and closing. So that's working at least. Okay, so let's go to app.css and let's start writing some of this CSS. So we're going to say .modal. Let's zoom in a bit here. We're going to say it has a position, which is fixed. By the way, you can of course copy this from the link in the description. We're going to give it a Z index of 1, meaning it will appear on the top of the screen. We're going to give it a left of 0 and a right of 0. Okay, setting its position. We're going to say the width is equal to 100%. The height is equal to 100%. We're going to say overflow auto. And then we're going to say the background color is equal to the following. This is going to be RGBA. And we're going to have 0, 0, 0, and then 0.4 opacity. That's going to give us a nice gray color. Okay. Then we're going to have dot modal content. And for the modal content, we're going to have a background color. And the background color can be pound FE like that. Okay, we're going to have a margin. For the margin, it's going to be 10% and then auto. We're going to have some padding. This is going to be 20 pixels. We're going to have a border around the content, and this is going to be a 1 pixel solid border. And the color of it is going to be 888. Okay, so you can kind of see the preview right there. We're then going to have a width of 80%. Okay, so let's add our semicolon here so that doesn't give us an error. Okay, almost done. We're now going to have a close. So for the close is going to be the close button, right? So we're going to say color is equal to pound AAA like that. We're going to say float to the right. So this just means, hey, put this to the right side of the content. We're then going to say the font size is equal to 28 pixels. This will define the size, and the font weight is bold. Okay, so that's it for our styles. Again, you can just copy them from the link in the description if you don't want to type them out. Now, if we go back here, we refresh and we click on this. Now that's not quite how I wanted it to appear. Give me a sec here, guys. I'm gonna look at what's wrong and then I'll come back and we can fix this up. Okay, looks like I'm missing a comma here inside of my RGBA color. So that might've been the error. Let's see if we do this now. Okay, no, still giving us an issue. So give me a second. Aha, so I see here in my modal, I have a position of left 0, right 0. I actually wanted left 0, top 0. So let's try this now, and that's better. That's what I wanted. So now you can see that what it's doing is kind of filling the whole screen with this opacity, and then it's showing me the modal here, and I can close it by clicking the X button. And now what we can do is just add a bit of spacing between our fields, and then I'll be kind of done for the styling, and we can hook up updating and deleting. So let's go to index.css, and inside here, I'm just going to do a general style on all my input tags, where I say they have a margin top of 10 pixels. I'm then going to do the same for my button and my label. So I'll say input, comma, button, comma, label. I just want all of them to have a slight margin. So now you'll see when I click on this, there's a little bit of margin and it looks a bit nicer. Okay, now that we've got that finished, let's go and make it so we are able to actually edit these contacts. All right, so to be able to actually edit these contacts, what we pretty much need to know is what contact it is that we're editing, which means from our contact list here, when we press on this update button, we kind of need to go back into the app.jsx component and we need to indicate what that contact actually was and then open the modal using that context. So there's a few changes here and these components are going to be kind of intertwined. What we'll need to do is in the contact list, we're going to have a button be pressed. That button is going to tell the main app component, hey, we want to edit a contact. It's then going to open up a modal, and we're then going to need to pass that contact to the contact form, and then the form will allow us to edit that contact. So what that means is we'll start with the form, and inside contact form, we're going to take in some props. So we're going to say that my existing contact is equal to an empty object. And then we're going to take in an update callback, which is a function we're going to call as soon as we perform any updates. Now what we're going to do is for our first name, last name, and email is we're going to use the existing contact's first name, last name, or email if it exists. So we're going to say existing contact dot first name. By the way, sorry if you guys can hear those sirens here. It's quite loud, but we're going to keep going. We'll say existing contact last name, and we'll say existing contact dot email or an empty string. So what this is pretty much doing is saying, okay, let's look at the existing contact. If we have one, meaning we're actually editing a contact, we'll put in what their first name, last name, and email is. Otherwise, we'll just have an empty string. That's all that's doing. Now, at the same time, I also need to know here whether or not I'm updating or creating a new contact, because we'll have to change what we're doing inside of here based on if it's an update or if it's a create. So we're going to say const updating, okay, if we can spell this correctly, is equal to object.entries of the existing contact dot length does not equal 0. Now what this tells us is, okay, if you passed us an object that has at least one entry inside of it, that means that we're updating it because we actually have some existing data. If it doesn't, that means we're creating a new contact. So that's kind of how we know here with updating. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll change a few things based on if we're updating or if we're creating. So really, the only change that we actually need to handle is just in the URL here, because whether we're updating or we are creating, we're going to be submitting the same data, which is whatever's in this form. So what we'll do is we'll go to the URL here, we'll remove the create contact, and we're going to append to this some dynamic data, which is going to be the endpoint. So we're going to say, if we're updating, question mark, then we're going to put some backticks, which are just where the tilde key is on your keyboard, usually beneath the escape key. And we're going to say, well, if we're updating, then we're going to call the update contact, but we need to pass to this the ID of the contact we're updating. So we're going to pass in a $sign in our braces, allowing us to embed a variable. And we're going to say that this is the existing contact.id. Because if we have an existing contact, if we're updating, well, this is the one that we're updating. So we're calling update contact with that as the path parameter. Otherwise, we just put create contact like that. And that's pretty much it. So it just changes the URL based on if we're updating or creating to be either update or create. Nice. Then when we have the else here, we're just going to call the update callback. And what this update callback will do is just tell the app.jsx component, hey, we actually finished this. We didn't update or create operation. And that will then close the modal for us and allow us to update the data that we see from, the contact list. Okay, so we have the contact form. And the thing is, we need to pass to this the existing contact if we are, updating, right? So how do we do that? Well, we need to actually go to contact list. And from contact list, we need to take in some functions as well that we can call if we want to update a contact. So I'm going to say update contact and update callback. Now, the idea is whenever we perform an update, we'll call the update callback. And whenever we want to update a contact, we'll just call this function with the contact we want to update. So what we'll do is we'll go to the update button here and we'll say on this click, so on click is equal to, and this is going to be a function, and this function is going to call the update contact, and it's going to pass the contact. Okay, so we're saying, okay, if you click on click, we're going to have a little function here, arrow function, that will call update contact with the contact that we want to update. So now when we press that, what will happen is if we go back to app.jsx here, we want to make it so that that update contact call opens the modal that then allows us to update the contact. So for our contact form here, we need to pass in something. What is it that we wanted to pass? Let's remember here. We need the existing contact and the update callback. Okay, so let's actually do that after we do the contact list. So we're going to make a new function here. We're going to say open edit modal. Okay, now for the open edit modal, what we want to do here is open the modal with our contact. So we're going to say contact like that. And what this is going to do is say if the modal is open, simply return. Otherwise, we're going to actually set some new state. So we're going to make some new state here. We're going to say const, and this is going to be the contact. It's actually going to be the current contact, and then set current contact is equal to use state, and this will be an empty object. And the idea is this will store the contact that we're currently editing. So if we go here to this function, we're going to say set current contact to be equal to this contact, and then we're going to open the modal. So we're going to say set is modal to be equal to true. Okay, so if you say open edit modal, so if we call this function, we're going to check if it's open. If it is, we're just going to return. Otherwise, we're going to set the current contact, and then we're going to open the modal. So we're going to say on, what is this actually? It's going to say update contact is going to be equal to, and we're going to pass it the open edit modal function like this. And then in the contact form here, we're going to say the existing contact is equal to the current contact. Okay, we're now going to do one more thing. When we close the modal, we're going to say set current contact to be equal to an empty object, because as soon as we close it, now we're kind of resetting it, right? So we have open the create modal, which does this, open the edit modal, and then we have close modal. Now we need one more function, which is what's happening when we actually perform an update. So we're going to say const on update. On update, what we're going to do here is we're going to close the modal, which will do all this. And then we're going to fetch the contacts again because they could have been updated after the on update. So now for our contact list, we're going to have the update callback, which is equal to on update. And we need the same thing for our contact form. Okay, so we have update callback. Okay, I think that this is good for now. I know this is a little confusing, but let's test it and then we can move forward. So we're gonna go create new contact. You see it opens up the modal. And when I click on edit, you see it opens the modal, but this time it passes in our contact information. Now the only thing is that this says create contact when really we want it to say edit contact. So let's go change that. We're gonna go to contact form, gonna scroll down to where it says create contact. And again, we can just do some dynamic rendering. So we can say editing, or what is this? Updating, question mark, and then we'll say update, otherwise we'll say create. Okay, so we can test this again. If we go create new contact, shows us create. If we go update, shows us update. Let's try like Tim2. When I click on update, okay, I guess maybe we're getting an error because that didn't do what I was expecting it to do. So let's go inspect console, and it says syntax error is not valid JSON. Okay, server responded with a status of 405, method not allowed. So I suppose we're just submitting the wrong request type. So let's have a look at this. We can go here and notice that we get a post, which is not valid. Okay, so I believe that's because we used a patch. So let's go back to our contact form. And there's one more thing we need to change here, which is the method. So we're going to say updating question mark. Then we're going to call the patch method. Otherwise, it's post. So my apologies there, guys, but the method was not allowed. So you actually saw here, right? It said, hey, responded with 405, method not allowed, because we tried to send a post request when really we need to send a patch request. So let's call update again. Let's change this to Tim2, update, and now notice it worked this time, and it actually changed our email to be tim2@gmail.com. We can create a new contact. Let's go Jeff, Dean, okay, j@gmail.com. create, and then notice it shows up here. The only thing we need to handle is the delete. If we call update, you can see we can update this to be Jeff2, and that works completely fine. Okay, so let's handle the delete, and then we will be close to finished. So let's go back here to our contact list, and we need an onDelete function. So we're going to say const onDelete. Now, for delete, we just need the ID of the user that we want to delete. So we're just going to say ID like that. And now we need to send a request that allows us to delete the user. So what we'll do is the following. We will say try, and we're going to say const response is equal to await fetch, which tells me I need to make this an async function. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to await the following http://127.0.0.1/delete_contact. And we're going to change these to backticks so we can embed a variable in here. And the variable we're going to have is going to be slash, and then the $, the braces, and the ID of the user we want to delete. Now we need some options for this. So we're going to say const options are equal to, and in this case, all we need to do is specify the method. So we're going to say method is equal to delete. We don't need to do the application type JSON. We don't need to have all that JSON data because all we're doing is just calling this with the delete method. So that means we're going to pass options here. That's now going to send that delete request. Now what we need to do is we need to again check the status and see what happens. So we're going to say if the response.status is equal to 200, that means it was successful. So we're going to call the update callback. Otherwise, there was an error. So we're going to say console.error like this. Console.error. If we can spell that, and we're going to say failed to delete. And then we're going to have a catch block here, and we're going to catch the error, and we're going to say console.error. And actually, we could just alert the error. So we're going to say alert, and then we'll just alert whatever the error actually is. Okay, so I think that should be good. Let me quickly run through this because I know it went a little bit fast there. We have a try and a catch just because we could potentially get an error when we try to delete the contact. We set the options equal to method delete. We send the request. This time it's going to be this URL. With options, we're using the ID of the contact. We then check if it was successful, which needs to be if response.status is equal to 200, not 2. If it was successful, we call the update callback. That's going to tell our app.jsx here that we should close the modal and then fetch the contacts again because now we've deleted one, right? And then what we do if we have an error is we say failed to delete, or we catch it and we alert. Okay, so that's it. Now we just need to call this function. So we're going to have onClick is equal to, again, a function, and we're going to say onDelete, and we're going to pass the contact.id. Okay, we can test this out now. So let's go here, refresh, and click on delete. And it says failed to fetch, connection refused. Okay, I potentially just typed something wrong here, so let's see. Looks like I forgot my port 5000. So let's add 5000 in there, go back, and delete, and now notice that it works. And I can update. Okay, Tim2, create new contact, Jeff Doe, j.doe@gmail.com, and create, and you see that we create the contact. All of this going through our backend API. You can see the post request, get request, and the patch request, of course, and the delete request as well. Okay, so I think, guys, with that said, that is going to wrap up this video. As I said, I know it's not the most complicated project in the world, but I think this illustrated to you how we architect out the front end and the back end, the order in which we go about doing things, how we communicate between a front end and a back end, the different HTTP requests we can set, and what it's like actually treating the back end as kind of a separate system that has all of the data and has that protocol that we can then use from the front end. Keep in mind, now we can use this data anywhere we want in any type of application. Doesn't need to be the React app, which is the whole benefit of having a separate backend. Now it's very flexible to go and create different front ends, different interfaces, and different ways to communicate with the backend API. So I will wrap it up here. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.